just 21 seconds, Jasmine Crockett detonated the Senate like a political time bomb. Her voice cut through the chamber as she branded J.D. Vance Trump's spineless puppetan. Millions of Americans felt the shock ripple through their screens. Faces froze, tempers erupted, and the air crackled with the smell of humiliation. What could be so explosive that it left Vance powerless, trembling, and the nation on edge? Stay with us. This is a story worth every second of your time. Under the blazing red glow of the on-air sign, America held its breath. The Senate chamber, usually heavy with stale routine, had transformed into a gladiator's arena, every camera lens sharpened like a blade, waiting for the first strike. Millions of viewers from Boston to Bakersfield glued themselves to television screens, their living rooms becoming front row seats to a showdown that promised blood, if not literal, then political. The silence before the gavel fell wasn't calm. It was the silence of a storm crouching, ready to explode. Everyone knew this wasn't going to be just another hearing. This was war disguised as policy debate. Outside the Capitol, barricades lined the streets, not because chaos had erupted, but because Trump and J.D. Vance insisted on painting the city as a powder keg. Yet the facts told another story. Crime in Washington, D.C. had dropped to its lowest level in 30 years. It didn't matter. The narrative had already been planted. Graffiti splashed on brick walls, tents of the homeless turned into symbols of collapse, and talking heads on cable TV whispering that America's capital was slipping into anarchy. Half the nation bought the fear wholesale. The other half saw it as a con job, a stage-managed panic to pave the way for military boots on civilian streets. That fracture the trust torn in two hung over the chamber like a guillotine. At the center sat Jasmine Crockett, her jaw tight, her eyes sharp with a fire the cameras couldn't dim. For her, this wasn't theater. This was survival of law, of democracy, of truth itself. Across the table lounged J.D. Vance, his lips curled with the smugness of a man who thought his alliance with Trump made him untouchable. He tapped his pen lightly, a rhythm of arrogance that only grew louder in the chamber's tense silence. He believed this was his stage, that he would lecture the nation about law and order while casting himself as the savior of frightened Americans. But Jasmine knew the truth, and worse for him, she was ready to say it. The opening statements loomed, the gavel waiting to strike. Viewers leaned closer, the glow of their screens reflecting off anxious eyes. This wasn't just policy, this was theater at the edge of collapse. One side whispered about security, the other screamed about dictatorship. The line between them was razor thin, and everyone knew once the first blade of words was thrown, there would be no pulling back. Jasmine adjusted the microphone, her voice steady but cold like a spring. The nation leaned in, hearts hammering, because they already sensed what was coming. This would not be a polite hearing. It would be a battle, one that might decide not only the fate of J.D. Vance's political career, but the fragile bones of American democracy itself. And the question that hovered, unspoken yet deafening, was this: was tonight just another hearing, or the moment America realized its future was on trial? The gavel cracked against wood, and instantly J.D. Vance leaned toward the microphone, his voice rolling through the chamber like a sermon rehearsed too many times. "We need order, not chaos," he declared, each syllable measured, wrapped in the confidence of a man convinced he controlled the narrative. The camera zoomed in, catching the faint smirk tugging at his lips, the kind of smirk meant for Trump watching somewhere in gilded comfort. He paused, waiting for applause that never came, only the low hum of anticipation that thickened the air. The silence was not deference, it was doubt. Then Jasmine moved. She didn't wait her turn, didn't bow to the ritual of restraint. Her hands slid a stack of papers across the desk, the cold rustle of evidence slicing through the chamber's heavy quiet. "Order," she repeated, her voice sharp, edged with disbelief. "Let's talk about order. Crime in Washington is at its lowest level in 30 years. The only chaos here is the chaos your side is manufacturing." She tapped the page, and the sound echoed like a hammer driving nails into a coffin. For a flicker of a second, Vance's eyes darted toward the stack, but he quickly returned to his mask of arrogance. Jasmine leaned closer to the mic, her words striking like gunfire. "This isn't protection, it's performance. It's a political theater stage to distract from the Epstein files, from broken promises, from the erosion of truth. And you, Senator Vance, are not a guardian of the people. You are nothing more than a spineless supplicant." The insult landed like a slap across the room. Gasps cracked the silence, reporters' pens froze mid-scribble. The word wasn't just an attack, it was a diagnosis, and the weight of it settled like a storm cloud over Vance's shoulders. The cameras swiveled, cutting to his face in merciless high definition. The color flushed hot across his cheeks, a nervous twitch flickered at the corner of his mouth. For the first time, the carefully rehearsed pose cracked, revealing the raw, unvarnished panic underneath. He gripped the desk as if steadying himself against an invisible blow, but his eyes betrayed him, darting sideways, searching for an escape. The millions watching at home saw it. They felt it. The illusion of strength had crumbled in less than half a minute, and Jasmine didn't stop. She pressed forward, her voice now lower, more deliberate, as if confiding a dangerous truth directly into America's ear. You stand here pretending to defend democracy while you kneel at the feet of a man who would burn it to the ground. The people don't need another puppet, they need someone with a spine. Every word tightened around Vance like a vice, and the chamber leaned in, caught between the thrill of spectacle and the gravity of history. For a moment, the Senate chamber was no longer a hall of marble and procedure. It was a courtroom, and J.D. Vance was not a senator, he was the accused, trembling under the weight of evidence, shame, and the truth stripped bare. Jasmine had drawn first blood, and the question now hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Had she just ignited the battle that would decide whether America's democracy still had a backbone or whether it would collapse under the weight of those willing to live without one? The word spineless still hung in the air like smoke after an explosion when the chamber ruptured into chaos. Applause erupted from one corner, boos and shouts from another, a raw collision of fury and vindication. Reporters sprang to their feet, phones alight, and within seconds the hashtag #SpinelessVance streaked across Twitter like wildfire. Each retweet a digital cheer echoing outside those marble walls. The gavel hammered again and again, but it was useless. The room had taken on a life of its own, a storm that could not be silenced. Jamie Raskin leaned into his mic, his voice cutting through the roar with surgical precision. "This is not security," he declared, eyes locked on Vance. "This is intimidation." The line struck like another thunderclap, amplifying the storm rather than calming it. Outside the building, protesters, who had been watching on giant screens, erupted, to one side chanting Jasmine's name, the other shouting law and order in defiance. It wasn't just a hearing anymore. It was a national spectacle, a battlefield transmitted in real time. Vance tried to seize back control. His staff scrambled behind him, sliding tablets and papers across the table. He seized a folder, flipping it open to reveal glossy images, graffiti scrawled across walls, homeless encampments sprawled under bridges. He jabbed at the pictures, raising his voice to be heard above the ding. "This is the reality." He barked, his words desperate, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. "This is what our citizens endure every day in this city. And you call it safe." The chamber quieted slightly, just enough for his words to echo, but it was the uneasy quiet of an audience waiting to see if a wounded actor could finish his lines. Jasmine didn't let him finish. She leaned forward, her voice sharp enough to slice through the false calm. "Pictures, is this your defense? Fear painted on paper?" Her hand slammed onto the desk, making the microphones jump. "Show us the law, show us the authority. You have none." The chamber gasped in unison. The camera zoomed mercilessly on Vance's face, catching the flicker of panic that betrayed him again. His mouth opened, but nothing came out, no statute, no precedent, no shred of legal grounding, just silence, heavy and damning. The gavel pounded harder, but the sound was drowned beneath the rising chorus of voices, some jeering, some cheering, all vibrating with the electricity of a nation watching its leaders stripped bare. Journalists whispered into live feeds, "Vance cornered." "Jasmine controls the floor." Outside, car horns blared as though the city itself had joined the uproar. Every second deep in the spectacle, every silence from Vance another nail hammered into the coffin of his credibility. The area in the chamber was no longer just charged, it was combustible, trembling with the sense that one more spark could turn debate into detonation. And as Jasmine locked eyes with Vance, unwavering, the question rose like a drumbeat in every mind across America. When the law is finally laid bare, will J.D. Vance stand his ground or will he collapse under the weight of a spine he never had? Jasmine didn't waste the momentum. She turned from Vance's silence and locked her gaze straight into the cameras, speaking not to the Senate but to the millions of Americans watching from their living rooms. "Do you know why you're seeing troops in your capital?" she asked, her tone rising, almost accusatory. Because Donald Trump wants you terrified. He wants you staring at graffiti and tense, so you'll forget about the one file. You can't bury the Epstein file. The words struck like a hammer, and suddenly, the chamber wasn't just a chamber, it was a crime scene where the truth itself had been smothered. Viewers leaned forward, sensing that Jasmine was lifting the curtain on something darker than anyone had admitted on air. As she spoke, the screens behind her flickered with images, not today's DC, but the nightmare of January 6, 2021. A smoky haze filled the air, officers in riot gear blooded, shields cracked, 140 wounded in a single day. The footage was raw and unflinching. Police dragged down marble steps, fists and flags turned into weapons, the sacred halls of Congress overrun. This, Jasmine thundered, pointing to the chaos frozen on screen. This was an emergency. This was an insurrection. And yet Mr. Vance would have you believe that tents under a bridge are more dangerous than an armed mob trying to end American democracy. The chamber stilled, as if everyone had been forced to relive the trauma in unison, the ghosts of that day clawing their way back into the present. Then snapped back, his voice breaking the silence with forced bravado. "That was different," he said, his tone sharp but betraying an edge of defensiveness. He jabbed a finger toward Jasmine, leaning forward as if proximity could strengthen his argument. "This is about law and order, about keeping our city safe from decay and disorder. Don't twist history to fit your agenda." But his words rang hollow against the images still blazing across the screen's broken glass, barricades overturned, police screaming for backup. The juxtaposition was damning, and he knew it. Sweat glistened at his temple, his jaw clenching tighter with each passing second. Jasmine didn't blink. "Law and order," she repeated, her voice a whip crack. "Don't insult the American people by pretending you're their protector while you serve as the bodyguard of Trump's lies. You don't want order, you want obedience. You don't want law, you want submission. You are laundering his crimes by inventing a crisis that does not exist." She slammed her hand on the desk, the microphones rattling. And every American watching can see it. The weight of her words didn't just linger, they suffocated. Every syllable stripped another layer of Vance's defense, leaving him exposed under the glare of the cameras. The room buzzed with tension, reporters whispering into live feeds, their words carried instantly across the nation. Social media feeds lit up again. Hashtag Epstein Files trending alongside hashtag SpinelessVance, the two hashtags twining together like twin blades aimed straight at the heart of Trump's operation. And as Jasmine sat back, eyes never leaving Vance, the question echoed through every corner of the chamber, through every household watching. Was J.D. Vance truly defending law and order, or was he trying to scrub Trump's sins clean by staging a brand new crisis? The doors at the back of the chamber creaked open, and in walked a man whose presence shifted the air itself. He wore a crisp suit, but his limp betrayed the damage no tailoring could hide. His name was Sergeant Daniel Ruiz, a Capitol Police officer who had been crushed in the mob on January 6th. Cameras zoomed in as he adjusted the sleeve of his jacket, revealing the faint outline of surgical scars crawling up his forearm. He took the witness seat, his breath measured, his eyes haunted. The chamber fell into a hush so deep that the hum of the fluorescent lights became audible, as if even electricity paused to listen. His voice cracked as he spoke. "I was thrown to the ground. My shield was ripped from me. A flagpole broke my ribs. I remember thinking, this is how it ends, in the halls I swore to protect." His words weren't rehearsed. They were torn from the marrow of memory. Senators shifted uncomfortably, some lowering their gaze. Viewers at home gripped their armrests, reliving that day through the raw testimony of a man who had bled on those marble steps. "I still wake up at night to the sound of the screaming," Ruiz said softly. "And I ask myself, why did we have to fight our own citizens?" Jasmine leaned forward, her eyes never leaving Vance. "Do you hear that pain?" she demanded, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "That is the cost of your loyalty. That is the price Americans pay when leaders like you bow to lies instead of defending truth." The words cracked through the chamber like thunder, each syllable hammering the image of Vance as a man chained to Trump's shadow. The camera cut to him instantly, and the nation saw his face tighten, his lips pressed in, his composure faltering under the weight of Ruiz's testimony. Vance swallowed hard, then forced out a reply. "You are weaponizing emotion," he muttered, as though the dismissal could wash away the agony still hanging in the air. The attempt at composure sounded brittle, his voice a shell of defiance struggling to mask retreat. His words scattered in the silence, fragile, empty. Jasmine's eyes narrowed, her response slicing through the chamber with surgical coldness. "No," she said, her voice low, deliberate, and devastating. "I'm weaponizing truth, something you've never carried." The line detonated instantly, reporters gasping, keyboards clattering, social feeds exploding. The phrase would loop on every news broadcast by midnight, carved into headlines that no amount of spin could erase. Vance's shoulders slumped slightly, his gaze dropping not in thought, but in the recognition of a man cornered. The weight of the moment hung heavier than the marble above them. The officer's scars, Jasmine's fury, and Vance's silence formed a tableau more powerful than any scripted drama. Viewers across the country knew they weren't watching a debate anymore, they were watching a reckoning. And as the camera panned slowly from the witness stand back to Vance's vacant eyes, one question gripped the nation like a vice. How many more truths will need to be dragged into the light before J.D. Vance finally breaks under the silence of his own cowardice? The chamber was still thick with the echo of Sergeant Roos's testimony when Ed Martin's voice cut in like a jagged blade. He leaned forward, lips curled in defiance, his words dripping with venom. "The January 6th committee destroyed evidence." The accusation dropped into the room like a live grenade, igniting murmurs, gasps, and the frantic tapping of reporters racing to beam the line across the nation. It was the oldest trick in the book: hurl a shadow, no proof require, let suspicion do the rest. But Jasmine didn't flinch. Slowly, deliberately, she reached beneath her desk and lifted a massive binder, its spine heavy with the weight of truth. Cameras zoomed in as she let it slam onto the table with a sound that reverberated like a gavel of its own. She spread the pages open, each sheet a shard of testimony, a piece of the mosaic that told the story of January 6th. Her voice cut through the chaos. 1,000 sworn depositions. 1 million documents, and not a single fact has been disproven. The silence that followed was not calm, it was suffocation, pressing down on the chamber like a lid-sealing shut. Ed Martin tried to sneer, but his eyes betrayed unease. And then Vance, desperate to puncture Jasmine's momentum, forced a smile that looked more like a grimace. "Facts," he said, his voice tight, "are flexible." The words floated out into the chamber, thin and poisonous, a direct assault on the very foundation of truth. A ripple of disbelief spread across the room. Some senators shifted uncomfortably, others shook their heads. The viewers at home felt the hair rise on their arms. This wasn't just politics, this was the casual desecration of reality itself. Jasmine's eyes snapped toward Vance, sharp and unyielding, but she didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calm was colder than fury, her silence more dangerous than shouting. She let the moment stretch until the tension became unbearable, until every pair of eyes, every camera, every beating heart was locked on her. Then she leaned into the microphone, her tone low but resonant, each word deliberate, each syllable heavy as stone. "If facts bend," she said, her gaze sweeping the chamber, "democracy breaks." She held the binder aloft, pages fluttering like restless ghosts. Then she turned her head, not toward Vance, not toward Martin, but straight into the camera's eye, straight into the homes of millions. Her stare was relentless, almost accusatory, as if she were looking into the soul of every American watching. "Which side are you on?" The question was not a query, it was a demand. The chamber fell into a silence so profound it felt like the air itself had been sucked away. And in that silence, the nation understood. This was no longer about debate, no longer about party lines. It was about choosing between the fragile spine of truth or the seductive void of lies. Jamie Raskin raised his hand for recognition, and when the gavel granted him the floor, his voice carried the weight of constitutional history itself. Calm but razor-edged, he began, "Under the Home Rule Act, the President does not have the power to seize command of the Metropolitan Police Department. That authority remains with the mayor of D.C. Anything else is not governance, it is usurpation." His words weren't just legalese, they were a direct accusation that the so-called Order Trump and Vance promised was nothing more than a hostile takeover dressed up in patriotic slogans. The chamber murmured, the sound low and uneasy, as though the very walls of Congress knew the line between law and tyranny was being crossed before their eyes. Jasmine seized the opening like a predator sensing blood. She leaned toward the microphone, her voice cutting through the growing tension. "This is illegal," she said flatly, her tone carrying the cold certainty of a verdict. She let the word illegal hang in the air for a beat too long, daring Vance to blink. Then she slammed her palm onto the desk, rattling the stack of evidence before her. This is reckless. You are playing with fire in the very heart of our democracy. Her eyes bored into Vance, unflinching, while the camera zoomed in to capture every tremor in his posture. The audience at home saw it, the slight twitch in his jaw, the flicker of unease he couldn't conceal. But Vance was too seasoned to fold immediately. He straightened, his voice rising with practiced indignation. The president must protect the nation, he shot back, each word dripping with self-righteousness. When cities fail their people, it is the duty of the commander-in-chief to step in. He gestured broadly toward the images of graffiti and tents still glowing on the monitors, trying to cast himself as the man of action. The delivery was forceful, but beneath the polish, there was something brittle and an edge of desperation clinging to every syllable, as though even he knew the argument was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. Jasmine struck like lightning. She leaned forward, her voice laced with venom, eyes locked on him so tightly the chamber itself seemed to shrink around them. "Protect," she sneered. "You're not protecting the people, you're protecting his ego. You're not defending America, you're defending a man terrified of being exposed." The words detonated, sending a shockwave through the chamber. Senators shifted in their seats, the press gallery buzzed, and social media exploded with the line before the echo had even faded from the walls. Vance's face reddened, his composure slipping again, and for a moment the mask cracked enough to reveal the fear underneath. The silence that followed was not empty, it was heavy, suffocating, charged with memory. Viewers at home, staring at their screens, felt the déjà vu claw at them. They remembered barricades falling, officers bleeding, chants echoing like war drums through these same halls. And now they were being asked to accept it again, under a different name, cloaked in the same lies. Jasmine's words had sharpened the question that hung, unspoken but undeniable. Could the American people recognize that what they were watching was not security, not protection, but a mirror image of January 6th waiting to happen again, only this time, dressed in the costume of authority? Jasmine leaned forward, her fingers drumming once against the desk before she stilled them. Her eyes locked on Vance with the sharpness of a blade. "Let me ask you plainly," she said, her voice cold and deliberate. "What are these troops ordered to do? Who commands them? Is it the mayor of D.C., as the law requires, or is it the whim of one man in Mar-a-Lago?" The question sliced through the chamber like a guillotine. Cameras panned instantly to Vance, catching the flicker in his eyes, the faint tug of panic in the corner of his mouth. For a heartbeat, he said nothing. He shuffled the papers in front of him, pretending to search for specifics, but every gesture looked rehearsed, hollow, and the silence only amplified the sound of his own weakness. When he finally spoke, it was vague, a lawyer's dodge dressed as an answer. "These men and women," he began, his voice softer now, "are here to ensure stability and safety for our citizens. Their orders are simply to assist where needed." He paused, hoping the words would pass as authoritative. Instead, the chamber erupted in whispers, "assist where needed." It sounded less like a plan and more like a blank check for occupation. Eleanor Holmes North, the delegate of D.C., seized the moment. She stood, her frame small, but her voice carrying with a force that made the rafters tremble. "This," she declared, her hand slicing the air, "is exactly why the district must have statehood. If D.C. were a state, no president could treat its citizens like pawns in a political game. No resident would wake up wondering whether their streets were being militarized to serve a man's ego." Her words lit a fuse in the gallery. The crowd of observers in the chamber, students, activists, longtime D.C. residents, erupted. "Statehood now, statehood now." The chant rolled like thunder, bouncing off marble, refusing to be silenced even by the frantic pounding of the gavel. The rhythm of it vibrated through the floor, shaking the very hearing into something more than a proceeding. It was a rally, a rebellion in miniature, broadcast live to every corner of America. Senators glanced nervously at one another. Some tried to hush the crowd, others sat back, recognizing they were witnessing a moment that had slipped out of their control. Vance sat frozen, his hands gripping the edge of the table as if the wood itself could anchor him. His attempt to dodge the question had backfired spectacularly. Instead of quieting the storm, he had fed it. The chants grew louder, pounding like drums of war. Jasmine turned slightly, letting the roar wash over her, before she fixed her gaze back on him. She didn't need to shout, her calm was more damning than fury. "History doesn't wait, Senator," she said evenly, her words slicing through the uproar with lethal precision. "It remembers, and right now, Every American is watching you fail to answer the simplest of questions: who commands your soldiers, and why are they here at all? The camera zoomed in tight on Vance, his silence louder than any denial, his face the portrait of a man cornered by truth. And as the chants of statehood now shook the walls, the hook burned into the hearts of millions watching at home. Was this the moment DC's century-long fight for equality would explode into history in front of a nation desperate to see who truly holds the reins of power? The chants still echo like rolling thunder, and Jasmine leaned into her microphone, her voice steady but carrying the sharpness of a blade unsheathed. "This is not order," she declared, pausing just long enough for the silence to grip the chamber. Her eyes swept across the room, daring anyone to contradict her. Then she struck, each word hammered into stone. "This is occupation." The impact was immediate. The words didn't just hang in the air. They detonated, sending shockwaves through the chamber and across every screen in America. The cameras swung instantly to J.D. Vance. The man who only minutes earlier had puffed his chest with confidence now sat rigid, his jaw clenched, his lips pressed shut as if wired closed. His silence was louder than any rebuttal. Under the ruthless glare of the lights, every flicker of unease, every twitch of his tightening brow, was magnifying and broadcast to millions. The image told the story more clearly than any soundbite. J.D. Vance had been cornered, and Jasmine Crockett had delivered the blow. The press gallery went into overdrive. Phones lit up, fingers flying across screens. Tweets appeared like sparks from a firestorm. Vance crushed by Crockett's facts. Occupation, not order. Crockett owns the chamber. Journalists whispered into cameras perched high above, their voices hushed but urgent, narrating the collapse of a senator in real time. The spectacle had shifted. This wasn't a hearing anymore, it was a dismantling, brick by brick, of Vance's credibility. Vance shuffled the papers before him, searching desperately for a response, but every second of silence only deepened the humiliation. His aides shifted uneasily behind him, whispering frantically, but no one could script a lifeline fast enough. The nation was watching him unravel, and there was no stagecraft strong enough to cover the cracks now laid bare. His throat bobbed, but no words came. His silence was not strategy, it was surrender. Jasmine sat back, not triumphant but resolute, as if her words had been less a victory and a necessary incision to reveal the rock beneath. She didn't smirk, didn't gloat, she let the weight of truth do the work. "Occupation," she repeated softly, almost as if speaking to herself, though the microphones carried it to millions. It was the final nail, the word that would replay endlessly on news loops and in campaign ads. The chamber, once roaring, now sat in stunned stillness, every senator, every staffer, every reporter aware that they had just witnessed the stripping of a man's armor live on national television. Outside, crowds erupted as news alerts blasted across phones. Some cheered, some fumed, but all of America was now asking the same question. Jasmine had crushed J.D. Vance so thoroughly that even he seemed to recognize it. But as the cameras lingered on his rigid face, as the tension in the room crackled like an electric storm without release, a darker question hovered like a shadow over the marble dome. Would Donald Trump allow this humiliation to stand, or would he unleash something far more dangerous to avenge the silence of his most loyal supplicant? Ed Martin leaned forward, his smile thin, his tone deceptively casual, but the venom in his words cold through the chamber like smoke. "Committee members," he drawled, pausing long enough for the cameras to lock onto his face, "should watch their mailboxes. Sometimes evidence has a way of disappearing, sometimes people do too." The threat wasn't shouted, it didn't need to be. Its quiet delivery was more chilling than any scream. A whisper of menace slipped into the nation's bloodstream on live television. The chamber froze, reporters stopped mid-sentence, pens suspended over paper. The audience in the gallery shifted uneasily, a ripple of discomfort breaking across the crowd like a shiver through skin. Everyone knew what had just been said. It was not politics, it was intimidation. And for a heartbeat, the air grew thick with the question no one wanted to speak aloud. How far would Trump's loyalists go to protect him? Jasmine didn't wait for the silence to fade. She leaned in, her voice cutting clean and sharp, a scalpel slicing through the poison. "Threats don't erase truth," she fired back, her words ringing like steel against stone. "They expose your fear." Her eyes pinned Martin in place, and for a moment, his smugness faltered. The room erupted, some gasps, some cheers, a chorus of tension that gave the gavel no chance of restoring order. Cameras lingered on Jasmine's face, catching the fire in her eyes, the kind that could not be scripted, the kind born of righteous defiance. The shot switched to Vance, and the nation saw what Jasmine saw. His jaw clenched so tight the muscles quiver, his hands balled into fists against the desk. He said nothing, but silence screamed louder than words. Every viewer at home could read it. The man who claimed to defend law and order was rattled, cornered, his calm mask stripped away. The threat Martin voiced had touched something raw in him, something that revealed the stakes, and far beyond graffiti or tense. The gallery stirred again, whispers spreading like sparks. Was this a warning? Was it a signal? On Twitter, the clip was already spreading, tagged with #ThreatPolitics and #SpinelessVance, trending alongside Jasmine's earlier line. Outside the building, protesters lifted their voices, chanting louder as the echo of Martin's words spilled onto the streets. Fear had been unleashed, but so had defiance. Jasmine leaned back, her face unreadable, but her words carried the calm authority of someone who knew the cameras were now her weapon. "You think shadows protect you," she said evenly. "But shadows only grow when the truth is too bright for you to face." The chamber went silent again, her voice lingering like a warning shot across the bow of tyranny. And as the broadcast cut between Jasmine's unflinching stare, Martin's twitch of unease, and Vance's clenched fists, a question began to pulse in the minds of millions of Americans watching from their living rooms. Was this merely the threat of words, or the first glimpse of a darker strike Trump's loyalists were plotting behind closed doors? J.D. Vance straightened in his chair, eager to shake off the sting of Martin's exposed threat. He thrust his finger toward the cameras, his tone sharpened with rehearsed outrage. "Democrats don't want safety," he barked. "They want chaos in cities, like Baltimore and Chicago. They let crime run wild so they can tighten their grip on power. Look around. Do these people look protected to you?" His words rose like a preacher's sermon, designed not to convince but to inflame, to paint blue cities as crumbling hellscapes under Democratic rule. The gallery erupted in shouts, some in agreement, some in anger, the chamber suddenly vibrating with raw division. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She reached calmly for a folder beside her, flipped it open, and slid a chart across the table with deliberate precision. Numbers glared back under the lights, unforgiving. "Here are the facts," she said, her voice cutting through the din like glass shattering on stone. "Crime in D.C. has fallen nearly 30% in just the last 3 years. Baltimore, down. Chicago, down. The trend is the same across every major city you've chosen to scapegoat." Her tone hardened as she locked her gaze on Vance. "So if cities are safer today, and they were, what exactly are you selling, Senator?" Because it isn't truth. The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by the frantic clatter of reporters tweeting the numbers before she even finished. Vance's jaw flexed, his lips pressed into a thin line. He tried to wave the figures away, but Jasmine pressed harder, each word a scalpel cutting through the narrative he'd wrapped himself in. "You're not selling safety," she said, leaning closer until her voice dripped into the microphone, intimate and lethal. "You're selling fear like a used car dealer polishing up a broken machine, hiding the rust, praying no one looks under the hood before you close the deal." The insult landed like a thunderclap, gasps rippled through the chamber, some laughter broke out in the gallery, but most eyes stayed locked on Vance, watching the blow land. He bristled, gripping his papers so tightly his knuckles went white. "That's absurd," he spat, but the words faltered, thin and defensive. The cameras didn't miss it, nor did the audience at home. They saw a man exposed, his argument crumbling under evidence, his composure eroded by the sting of humiliation. Jasmine didn't need to say more. The silence itself indicted him. Her numbers were unshakable, her metaphor unforgettable. The narrative he tried to peddle lay wrecked on the floor, nothing more than a lemon sold under false pretenses. In living rooms across America, viewers leaned closer, feeling the tension cold tighter, realizing this wasn't just political theater, it was revelation. The lie had been dragged into the light, stripped down, and ridiculed in real time. And as the camera lingered on Vance's reddening face, the question burned hotter than ever in the nation's mind. How many Americans would still buy the wreckage he was peddling, and how many had already decided they were done being sold a broken car wrapped in fear? The chamber teetered on the edge of collapse. Shouts ricocheted off marble, senators rising from their seats, the gallery a boiling sea of fists and voices. The gavel struck again and again, its sharp crack swallowed by the roar. Outside, the streets mirrored the chaos. Thousands pressed against barricades, their chants pounding like war drums. On television, the broadcast split into a jarring double frame inside the hearing room, veins of fury and defiance. Outside the Capitol, signs waving, flags unfurling, protesters clashing in a storm of noise and conviction. It wasn't two pictures, it was one nation torn in half, live before the world. Through it all, Jasmine sat still, her composure a weapon sharper than any insult she had already delivered. She let the chaos crest, let the storm swallow itself, then leaned forward into her microphone. Her voice dropped low, steady, a stark counterpoint to the hysteria filling the room. "This is not about me," she said, each word measured, "and it is not about him." She lifted her chin, eyes locked not on her colleagues, not on Vance, but on the unblinking red light of the camera. "It is about your vote." The line cut through the cacophony like a blade through fabric. The gallery froze, the chants outside faltered, even the senators seemed suspended mid-motion. For a fleeting instant, it felt as if all of America was holding its breath, waiting. Her words traveled past the walls, past the cameras, and straight into the living rooms of millions. Viewers at home saw not a politician, but a messenger, her voice shaking loose the illusion that this was only about DC, only about a hearing. The framing changed. This was about them. Their power, their agency. She didn't shout, she didn't plead. She spoke with the weight of inevitability, like someone speaking a truth already etched in stone. J.D. Vance shifted beside her, but he said nothing, his silence only sharpened the contrast. The man who claimed to defend order sat clenched and trembling, while Jasmine made the hearing not about herself, but about the people. The camera lingered on his reddened face, then cut back to hers, calm and defiant. The juxtaposition was merciless, fear versus courage, submission versus conviction. Outside, the chants rose again, louder this time, transformed by her words. They no longer carried just anger, they carried resolve. Signs lifted higher, voices steadied, and the split screen showed a movement beginning to coalesce. Inside, the gavel still hammered, but it sounded more like a desperate heartbeat than authority. Jasmine's eyes never left the camera, her stare unwavering, as though she was daring every viewer to decide in real time whether they would act or surrender. The moment stretched, heavy, alive, electrified by possibility, and as the feed cut to break, the question hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Would Americans rise and claim the vote Jasmine had thrown back into their hands, or would fear the very weapon Trump and Vance had sharpened wrap itself tighter around their throats until silence became the new order? Jasmine's hand moved slowly, deliberately, like a magician about to reveal the final card in a rigged game. She pulled a thin folder from the stack beside her and flipped it open, the sound of paper against wood amplified by the silence pressing down on the chamber. Reporters craned their necks, cameras tightened their focus. The entire nation could feel at that instinctive pull when truth is about to step out from the shadows. She held up the document, the official diplomat order for the National Guard. "Here it is," she said, her voice low but sharp, each word a nail hammered into steel. The supposed plan to restore order in D.C. She let the room breathe for a moment before slamming it down so the microphones caught the thud. "But read closely. Nowhere does it state what these troops are assigned to do. No mission, no limits, no chain of accountability." She looked up, eyes sweeping the chamber. "This is not a plan for security. This is a blank check to intimidate voters." Gasps rippled through the gallery, reporters dove for their keyboards. The phrase "blank check to intimidate voters" blazed across Twitter before the echo of her words had even faded. The weight of it landed like a gavel stroke, and all eyes snapped to J.D. Vance. He shuffled in his seat, his hand twitching as if to reach for his papers, but he froze, realizing there was nothing to reach for. His lips parted, but no sound came. The camera zoomed closer, capturing the raw panic flickering across his face, the momentary collapse of a man unmasked in real time. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't need to. She simply let the silence expand, filling every corner of the room with the weight of exposure. Then, softly, almost like a whisper meant for the viewers at home rather than the chamber, she added, "This is how democracy dies, not with ballots burned, but with silence signed into orders that no one dares to question." The chamber sat stunned, the audience at home electrified, the certainty of the lie now laid bare. The screen split, showing the raging protests outside, chest thundering against the marble walls, colliding with the image of Vance shrinking in his chair. And in that collision, a single question ignited like a spark in the dry tinder of American fear and outrage. Jasmine just exposed the final, undeniable proof that the so-called guardians of order were nothing more than architects of control, and was this the moment the nation finally saw it for what it was? The silence after the damning documents still pressed heavy when Jasmine leaned in, her voice calm but sharpened to a knife's edge. "Let's strip this illusion once and for all," she said, her gaze fixed on Vance like a predator locking onto prey. "You are not Trump's partner, you are his errand boy. A messenger who carries his lies from Mar-a-Lago to the Senate floor and dares to call it leadership." The words detonated across the chamber like a charge placed under marble, every syllable hammering against Vance's carefully constructed image until cracks began to show. The gallery gasped, half with shock, half with exhilaration. Reporters clattered at their keyboards, desperate to capture the insult destined to dominate every headline. For a moment, all that could be heard was the fevered clicking of cameras and the restless shuffling of bodies leaning closer, unwilling to miss a second of the unraveling. And then Vance snapped. He surged forward, his chair screeching against the floor, his voice shaking with fury. "You will regret this," he shouted, his finger jabbing the air as if accusation could blot out humiliation. The sudden loss of control ricocheted through the chamber, a flash of rage that revealed just how deeply Jasmine's words had struck. The audience exploded, some cheering her audacity, others jeering in outrage. The gavel pounded furiously, but the no's only multiplied. The sound was no longer political debate, it was the roar of a mob, half in love with Jasmine's defiance, half drunk on Vance's fury. The television feed split, showing the protests outside swelling in real time, chants of statehood now crashing against counter-cries of law and order. The divide of America was no longer abstract. It was alive, screaming, tearing itself apart on a screen watched by millions. Jasmine, unfazed, waited until the no's reached a breaking point, then lowered her voice so the microphones carried every syllable with surgical clarity. "Threats don't frighten me, Senator," she said, her tone icy. "They expose you. They expose just how little you have left to offer the people you claim to serve." The line cut through the chaos, silencing the front rows of the gallery, forcing Vance back into his chair like a man yanked by invisible strings. His face burned crimson, his knuckles white against the desk. For the first time, it wasn't just that Jasmine had humiliated him, she had revealed H's anger as the mask of weakness it truly was. The chamber seemed to pulse, cameras zooming in close enough to catch the bead of sweat sliding down his temple. Vance opened his mouth as if to speak again, but the words failed, smothered by the roar of the crowd, by the cold calm radiating from the woman across the table. Jasmine's stare held him like a vice, and the audience at home felt the weight of the moment pressing into their own lungs. And as the hearing teetered on the edge of chaos, one question gripped every viewer across America. Had J.D. Vance already lost control, or was the real explosion of his unraveling still to come, waiting to detonate before the nation's eyes? The roar of the gallery still lingered in the rafters when Jasmine leaned forward, her voice cutting through the chaos like steel through glass. She didn't waste time, didn't offer preamble. "What law," she demanded, her tone sharp and deliberate, "allows this takeover? What statute gives you or Donald Trump the authority to seize control of the Metropolitan Police Department?" The words hung heavy, charged, every syllable a challenge carved into stone. The microphones caught the tremor in the air, the hush that fell as everyone waited for J.D. Vance to answer. He froze, his hands gripped the edges of the desk so tightly his knuckles turned bone white, but his eyes darted nervously toward the folder in front of him, then toward his aides behind him. Tapers shuffled, pens scratched, but no one produced what Jasmine had asked for. The camera zoomed in close, merciless, capturing the twitch in his jaw, the sheen of sweat breaking across his temple. He cleared his throat, then spoke in vague circles. "The president has a responsibility to protect the nation, to ensure." Jasmine cut him off, her voice rising like a hammer slamming down. "That is not the law, that is rhetoric. Answer the question or admit you have none." Her words thundered across the chamber, louder than the gavel pounding in vain. The audience erupted, some on their feet, others shouting over one another. The gallery transformed into an arena where the stakes were nothing less than the rule of law itself. Vance's lips moved, but no words came. He swallowed, tried again, but only silence spilled out, every second of it more damning than the last. Reporters leaned forward, typing furiously, the narrative already sealed before he even realized it. The feed split again. On one side, Vance's face sagging under the weight of exposure. On the other, social media feeds blazing with a single headline, Vance silenced, the soundbite of his non-answer replayed on loop. A volley of words that screamed louder than any defense. Jasmine didn't soften, she didn't give him space to recover. She leaned closer, her eyes locked on him, voice low but laced with fire. "This is what America needs to see," she said. "A man who cannot name the law because it doesn't exist. A man who calls himself a defender of democracy while he tears at its foundation with empty hands." The chamber fell into stunned silence, the truth now undeniable. J.D. Vance lowered his head, his shoulders sagging, his silence stretching longer, heavier, until it became a spectacle in itself. The image was burned into every screen across the country. Jasmine upright, defiant, unwavering, Vance crumbling in front of her, a man stripped of his last defense. And as the broadcast carried that frozen tableau into millions of homes, the question seared itself into the mind of every viewer. If J.D. Vance could not defend his own authority here, under oath, what would stop Trump's entire machine from collapsing the moment the law was forced to stand against them? The cameras cut from the blistering clash inside the hearing room to the chaos outside, on the streets of Washington. Floodlights illuminated a sea of protesters pressing against barricades, their voices rising like a single rolling thunder. "Democracy is not for sale." Cardboard signs, hastily scrawled with black marker, waved above the crowd, some dripping with rain, others lit by the glow of cell phones broadcasting live to millions. The chants grew louder with every passing minute, not just a protest but the sound of a nation's pulse. Inside, the echo of that roar seeped through the chamber walls. Jasmine Crockett pointed toward the monitors displaying the live feed from outside. Her voice cut through the silence like a blade. "You see? That right there is the spine of America." Her words cracked the tension in the room, sending ripples across the faces of the committee. Staffers shifted, journalists scribbled frantically, and even the cameras seemed to lean in closer. Vance, once the iron-fisted defender of Trump's narrative, now sat hunched, shrinking under the glare of both the lights and the truth. He gripped his notes so tightly that the paper began to curl at the edges, his eyes darting toward the feet as if searching for an escape. But there was none. The crowd outside didn't look like paid protesters or professional agitators. They looked like America itself, students in hoodies, veterans in worn jackets decorated with patches, mothers carrying children on their shoulders, retirees wrapped in flags they had fought for. They weren't polished or rehearsed, but they were undeniable. Their chant grew louder, timed with the pounding of drums and fists against metal barricades. "Democracy is not for sale. Democracy is not for sale." A surge of tension cut through the room as the sound infiltrated the hearing. It was no longer possible to pretend this was politics as usual. This was a movement swelling in real time, a storm neither scripted nor contained. Reporters began sending push notifications, crowds demand statehood, defend Crockett, networks interrupted regular programming to show the protest live, the crawl at the bottom of the screen reading, "America rises." Jasmine didn't gloat, she didn't smile. Her voice carried the gravity of a warning as she turned back to her colleagues. "You can silence me, you can smear me, you can even try to bend the law, but you cannot silence them. And every second you refuse to listen only makes them louder." Vance kept his head lowered, his silence broadcast to millions, the image of a man cornered not just by evidence but by the raw, living power of the people. The contrast was undeniable, one side trembling behind technicalities, the other standing firm in the streets. The hearing ended not with a gavel but with the roar outside shaking the chamber walls. And as the cameras lingered on Jasmine's steady gaze, the question that haunted every viewer was no longer about her, or Vance, or even Trump. It was far bigger, far more dangerous. Would this swelling tide remain just a protest or erupt into the movement that could rewrite America's future? The chamber fell into a hush so complete it felt engineered, like a soundstage built for the last scene. Jasmine rose without looking at the gavel or the chair. She kept her eyes locked on J.D. Vance as if the two of them were the only people left in the building. Outside, the distant thunder of the crowd rolled through the walls. Inside, cameras tightened into merciless close-ups, capturing a nation's breath held between two heartbeats. Jasmine didn't raise her voice, she sharpened it. "History will not remember you as brave," she said, every word placed with the precision of a verdict. "It will remember you as spineless." The line didn't just land, it branded. You could see it in the way Vance's shoulders flinch, in the way his fingers curled as if trying to hold on to a script that had dissolved in his hands. He didn't answer, not with words. His chin dipped, a fraction at first, then further, the posture of a man who had finally met the full weight of his own performance. The microphones caught only the smallest sounds, the soft rasp of fabric as he exhaled, the paper beneath his knuckles crinkling as if begging him to speak. He had nothing left, no statute, no precedent, no shield of rhetoric. The cameras wandered for proof, any proof of defiance in his face, and found only the stillness that follows surrender. Jasmine stood her ground, letting silence work as her last witness. She didn't pivot to triumph, didn't smile for the feed. She simply let the image calcify, a woman upright under the glare, a man shrinking beneath it. Outside, the chant swelled again, "Democracy is not for sale," rising like a tidal pull. A split screen flashed the crowds, then returned to the table where the duel had ended without a sword being drawn. The room seemed to lean toward Jasmine, as if gravity itself had chosen a side. She leaned toward the mic one final time, soft enough that the boom operators had to chase the whisper, firm enough that it reached every living room in America. "Power is a loan from the people," she said. "And the bill always comes due." She let that line hang, turned her gaze from Vance to the lens, and held it, inviting the country not to applaud, but to decide. The gavel struck, the red light burned, and as the broadcast hovered on that unblinking close-up, Jasmine unshaken, Vance bowed. The question seized the nation's throat like a hand. If this was the moment truth finally stood up, would America speak the last word, or let silence finish the story? The aftermath exploded before the dust even settled. Within minutes, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, all of them were painted with the same banner. #Spine of America. It wasn't a slogan crafted in a strategy room. It was born live, forged in the moment. Jasmine Crockett stood unshaken while Vance bent beneath the weight of truth. The hashtag hit #1 worldwide in less than an hour, a digital tidal wave that carried her image, the raised chin, the unflinching stare across every screen in America. Cable anchors scrambled to keep up, their lower thirds flashing phrases like "the warrior of democracy" and "the woman who wouldn't bow." Editorials were drafted at breakneck speed. Front pages cleared their leads. It wasn't just a hearing anymore, it was history crystallized in real time. Yet amid the flood of praise, the undercurrent of unease swelled darker. Conservative pundits railed about witch hunts, allies of Trump whispered about countermeasures, and on fringe forums, talk hardened from rhetoric to plans. Outside the Capitol, the chants of thousands still thundered, "Democracy is not for sale." But the cameras caught something else too. Groups of men slipping through the crowd with earpieces, snapping photos, vanishing into side streets. The victory, it seemed, had lit more than just celebration, it had ignited the other side's fury. Jasmine herself refused to bask. When reporters cornered her in the marble hallway, she spoke not of triumph but of vigilance. "This is not the end," she said. "This is proof that truth can stand. But proof is only powerful if the people act on it." Her words ricocheted across the networks, dissected in real time, looping endlessly in clips that Americans replay at their kitchen tables and bar counters late into the night. The camera found her once more as she exited the building, the chanting crowd parting like a tide. She paused on the Capitol steps, raised a hand not in victory, but in warning. The flashbulbs fired like lightning, catching the solemnity in her eyes. And then she spoke the words that turned a triumph into a reckoning. "One battle does not win a war. Tonight we proved courage has a voice. The question is, will it be loud enough when the storm truly comes?" The feed cut there, the image frozen, her silhouette against the floodlights, her words hanging like prophecy, leaving a nation to wonder if they had just witnessed a closing chapter, or the opening shot of the fight that would define their generation. By nightfall, the hearing was already being replayed, in an endless loop across every network. Anchors leaned forward in their chairs, voices thick with astonishment. One correspondent on MSNBC declared flatly, "Crockett has redefined political courage." On CNN, the chyron blazed, "Crockett crushed Vance." Even Fox, reluctant and bristling, struggled to downplay the spectacle, framing it instead as an unexpected show of defiance. But the clip spoke louder than spent 30 seconds of firepower had rewritten the balance of the day. Across America, households were not just watching but reacting. In small towns and big cities, families gathered around glowing TV screens, their dinner plates forgotten as Jasmine's words echoed through living rooms. A mother in Ohio wiped away tears, whispering to her teenage daughter, "That's what strength looks like." A retired veteran in Texas recorded a message on his phone. "Mom, I haven't trusted a politician in years, but tonight you made me believe again." Thousands of handwritten letters, some shaky with age, some scrawled with youthful fury, began arriving at Jasmine's office with an hour's "thank you for standing tall when we could not." The wave of gratitude was as much a warning as it was praise. Americans weren't just applauding, they were demanding that this courage not fade, that it carry through the long nights ahead. Hashtags surged, hashtag Spine of America, hashtag Crockett Courage, hashtag We Stand with Jasmine. Political analysts called it the Crockett effect, a rare moment when truth cut through partisan nose and struck bone. And yet, beneath the praise, there was an undercurrent of unease. Every commentator knew the story wasn't over. Courage invites retaliation. Exposing a lie means daring the liar to strike back. And with Trump looming in the shadows, silence could not be mistaken for surrender. The more the people rallied behind Jasmine, the more dangerous the counterpunch would become. Inside the Capitol, the committee chambers sat empty now, but the echo of her words lingered like smoke in the rafters. Outside, candles flickered at impromptu vigils, strangers clasping hands in the dark, whispering a vow that this moment would not be forgotten. The cameras closed in on Jasmine walking out of the hearing that night, her shoulders squared, her face lit not by triumph but by resolve. The nation's question was no longer what had just happened. It was far more urgent, far more electrifying. Would this spark of courage ignite into a fire that carried all the way to Election Day or be snuffed out by the storm already gathering? When Jasmine finally stepped through her front door that night, the roar of the crowd was replaced by silence, but silence carried its own weight. Her phone pulsed with notifications, hundreds, then thousands, each vibration a reminder that her words had detonated far beyond the Capitol walls. She set the device down, poured herself a glass of water, and opened her laptop. The first email she clicked nearly knocked the air from her chest. "You'll pay for this. We know where you live." The second one was worse, graphic threats against her family, couched in rage and cowardice. For a moment her hands trembled. The courage the cameras had captured hours ago now collided with the fear no lens ever saw, but then she scrolled further. The flood of messages shifted. "My son watched you tonight and said, 'I want to be like her.' Another, 'We marched in Selma, and tonight we marched again. With you.' And another still, 'I've never voted in my life, but you made me believe my voice matters.'" Thousands of voices, from every corner of America, filling the digital night with gratitude and resolve. She leaned back, pressing a hand to her chest, her eyes wet but burning with clarity. The threats were real, the danger undeniable. But the chorus of hope was louder, and in that private moment, without cameras, without applause, Jasmine whispered to herself the truth she had carried all along. Courage is not the absence of fear. It's the decision to stand anyway. Outside her window, the city hummed restless, the air charged with anticipation. Somewhere in the dark, her opponents were already sharpening their next move. Somewhere else, ordinary citizens were asking themselves if they, too, could stand when the moment arrived. Because the question hanging over America was no longer whether Jasmine Crockett would fight. It was something far more dangerous, far more electric. How many millions would dare to rise and fight with her? The room was dark now, lit only by the harsh white glow of a single camera. Jasmine sat forward, shoulders squared, gaze locked into the lens as if staring straight into the homes of millions. No staffers, no handlers, just her voice against the silence of a trembling nation. She took a breath, steady but charged, then spoke with the cadence of a gavel striking down history. "Don't kneel, don't fear, vote. That's your spine. That's America's future." The words didn't fall, they detonated. For a heartbeat, the silence afterward was deafening, as if the country itself had inhaled and wasn't sure it could exhale again. Outside, the chants of protesters still echoed through the city streets, merging with the hum of car horns and the low thrum of helicopters circling overhead. It felt less like a political season and more like the edge of a revolution. The camera held on Jasmine's face, the light catching the steel in her eyes, before beginning its slow retreat. Frame by frame, She grew smaller, but her presence expanded, filling the air, flooding living rooms, igniting kitchen tables and late-night debates. The music swelled, strings rising with a gravity that pressed against the heart, drums pounding like a call to arms. And then black screen. Across the void, white letters carved themselves into the darkness with the sharpness of a blade. Democracy survives when ordinary people find the courage to act. A final beat of silence, heavy, suffocating, then the faintest sound of a heartbeat echoed beneath the screen, steady but growing louder, as if reminding every viewer, "This is yours now." When the screen cut to black for the last time, it wasn't an ending. It was a dare, a demand, a summons to history. Because the question no one could escape now was not whether Jasmine Crockett had stood her ground. It was whether America itself would rise or kneel. In every battle Jasmine faced, the real victory was not in silencing her opponents, but in proving that courage belongs to those who refuse to bow, even when fear presses hardest. Her stand reminds us that democracy, like life, is not safeguarded by titles or power, but by ordinary people who dare to act when silence feels safer. The lesson is clear: courage is contagious, and your voice carries more weight than you think. So I ask you, when history knocks, will you answer with fear or with the spine to stand tall? Thank you for watching until this moment and for standing with us on this journey for justice. Your support means everything. Like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss what's next. And we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment below and let us know what moved you most in this story. Together, our voices make a difference.